Marxist ideology is now emblematic of American higher education, and internationalist politics has woven itself into the fabric of Europe. How did this happen? Who or what is behind it? All of this will be revealed in this video. The history of the United Nations begins with Woodrow Wilson, famous for the term Wilsonianism, the belief in the mass democratization of the world through warfare. World War I was fought over this question, in part, the right of the monarchies to continue existing. The outcome of that disastrous war was the mass collapse of monarchy and the proliferation of Wilson's favorite democratic liberalism, thus setting the future stage for Marxist infiltration and agitation. Woodrow Wilson, in 1913, would sign into being a banking cartel comprised of the Warburg dynasty and the Rothschild employee Jacob Schiff, who, according to Thultide, financed the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. The source for this claim is a 2010 paper written by Delphine Slotin. She concludes that Jacob H. Schiff's sponsorship of the March 1917 revolution was primarily motivated by his dedication to the cause of the Jewish people. And further, this web of financial subversion runs very deep among the Western powers. It should also be noted that during the Paris Peace Conference, the leaders of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France were all under the influence of international financiers belonging to the aforementioned financial dynasties. Bernard, Wolf of Wall Street, Baruch, and Paul M. Warburg acted as Woodrow Wilson's personal and financial advisors. Philip Rothschild Sassoon was David Lloyd George's private secretary, and George Clemenceau's Minister of Interior and right-hand man was Louis George Rothschild. Max M. Warburg was the Treaty of Versailles economic specialist. He also worked with Paul Warburg, Louis Nathaniel Rothschild, and Bernard Baruch to found the European Union in 1922. The EU project was figureheaded by Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi, a Freemason of the Vienna Humanitas Lodge. In 1920, at the end of World War I, at the Paris Peace Conference, the Allies would found the League of Nations, the forerunner to the United Nations. It was unable to exert much influence, owing to a lack of leverage, and nations would, owing to internal disputes, begin to pull out, bypassing the League of Nations with separate trade deals. This was not the end, however, as after the Second World War, Allied forces would sign the Declaration by United Nations at the Arcadia Conference of 1941 through 42. They wished any nation wishing to go to war against the Axis forces to sign such a document. Then, in 1943, the UN would be officially founded. Thultide writes, "At the Tehran Conference of 1943, the Allies, including the USSR, officially announced that the UN would replace the League of Nations by absorbing all of its infrastructure in what was essentially a massive rebranding operation. The UN, led by the Big Four, UK, USA, USSR, and China, was formally founded at the San Francisco Conference of 1945, immediately following the end of World War II. Since 1942, Roosevelt envisioned that the Big Four would act as four policemen, tasked with maintaining the post-war order within their respective spheres of influence. Britain in its empire in the West, the USSR in Eurasia and Eastern Europe, China in East Asia and the Pacific, and the United States in the Western Hemisphere. And would you know it, the Rockefellers were involved in the foundation of the UN. Between then and now, several documents of a worrying nature would emerge, such as the Jaffa Memo, outlining a plan to reduce birth rates in countries, which would serve as a strategy which would make replacement migration later necessary. Of the globalist power structure, anti-communist Congressman Larry McDonald said in 1976, before being murdered by communists on board Korean Airlines Flight 007, "The drive of Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government, combining super-capitalism and communism under the same tent, all under control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent." What can be readily apprehended today, that the system of the global elite is a form of post-bourgeois capitalism or neo-capitalism with socialist elements, was already known back in 1976. One of the major accomplishments of the UN was the establishment of centralized world finance. At the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, the International Monetary Fund was established, whose purpose was to grant cheap loans to the developing world, furthering the agenda of mass industrialization. We might also recall that one of the programs of Marx's Communist Manifesto was the establishment of central banking. The IMF founded the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the International Development Association. Those are two of the 5 international organizations owned by the World Bank. Needless to say, the introduction of centralized global finance was only one more step toward debt slavery under the rootless international forces of subversion. In other areas, the UN has sought to establish centralized control. It has its own courts, its own labor organizations, its own health committee, a refugee commission, an intelligence bureau, and its own financial organization. It even has its own military force, the UN Peacekeepers. Today, the UN has been behind the agenda of replacement migration under its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is essentially hyper-liberal in character. It advocates for open borders, effectively denying the right of a race to its nation and homeland, and it advocates for socialist policy abroad. Marxism is often reduced to its economic claims, but it does have a cultural aspect too. Generally, this entails the following. 1. The destruction of the family. 2. The destruction of the nation. 3. Destruction of religion. 4. The destruction of private property. In the previous part, I quoted Stalin, who stated unequivocally that race was not to be part of the nation. The Marxists were dedicated to anti-racism, and Leon Trotsky is often stated, even if incorrectly, to have been the inventor of the term racism as we understand it pejoratively today. Therefore, we might also add to this list the destruction of race. They did not stop at race, however. Sex roles were on the chopping block too, part of the program of destroying the family. The early USSR could easily be mistaken for a modern neoliberal society with regards to their pro-woman, pro-LGBT, and anti-family policies. When the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917, they almost immediately decriminalized homosexuality, legalized abortion, divorce, banned adoption, canceled bastard status, gave women equal property, education, and working rights, and so on. The Soviet Institute for Social Hygiene published multiple reports, The Sexual Revolution in Russia, stating that homosexuality was perfectly natural and that it should be respected legally and socially. The USSR was even involved with the German Institute for Sexual Research, or Institute of Sexology, which pioneered transgenderism. Marxism had to dismantle all of these pillars of society, otherwise it would have encountered natural resistance. When a people identifies as a race, as a family, or as a nation, it does not identify as a class, let alone as a proletariat. When a people recognizes hierarchy, then it does not see the exercise of authority, economic or otherwise, as a form of exploitation. It's only when these forms of identity and meaning are taken away that communist subversion becomes possible. Lenin realized that the revolution would, therefore, not take place spontaneously, as history had proven to him. The furthest development of this identification was with the Frankfurt School's cultural Marxism, which was a strategy to deconstruct those pillars in order to pave the way for the revolution. The Frankfurt School was founded in 1923 in the Weimar Republic and very much was the hotbed of the revolution in America. Fearing government reprisal in 1933, it moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and then to America. It underwent several name changes during the period. Important intellectuals in the Frankfurt School included Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, Leo Lowenthal, and Frederick Pollock. Regarding the religious affiliation of the Frankfurt School, historian Peter Gordon argues, nearly all of the core members of the Frankfurt School were Jewish by heritage, if not by conviction or practice. The Frankfurt School is most well known for the invention of critical theory. Critical theory is the concept that the purpose of theory ought not to be merely the description of phenomena, but rather the revolutionary changing of society. They posited that capitalism was able to maintain its stranglehold on the proletariat, not through economic and class-based domination of the proletariat, but rather through bourgeois cultural domination, such as that of the nuclear family, or through the application of the concept of race. They called this cultural hegemony. They saw all of these things as social constructs, and they took to task reducing them down and deconstructing them, revealing that they're enforced by power relations between the oppressed and an oppressor. They believed that, after the end of capitalist cultural hegemony, the proletarian Marxist revolution could then take place. Marx separated society into the base and the superstructure. The base was the sum of economic interrelations, while the superstructure was essentially everything else, such as culture, race, and religion. Marx put almost exclusive emphasis on the base, believing that it controlled all social relations. However, where the Frankfurt School differed is on the role and importance of the superstructure. They, diverging from Marx, put emphasis on the superstructure. This was crucial to their strategy. By infiltrating society and instituting a slow cultural and propagandistic upheaval, they would come to dominate all of society's institutions, such as academia and the media. This was called by Marcuse the Long March through the institutions. Ultimately, the Frankfurt School's theories were an effective strategy of Marxist subversion, the likes of which had never before been seen, but which were prefigured by Marxist-Leninism. Almost all of modern academic social inquiry, such as gender studies, racial studies, and so on, are based on the postmodern, post-Marxist intellectual discipline pioneered by the Frankfurt School. Everything was reduced to social constructs and then promptly deconstructed. This is the crux of modern ideological subversion. The modern phenomena of identity politics can be traced directly back to the theories of the Frankfurt School. The oppression Olympics is an outgrowth of their reduction of culture to power relations between oppressor and oppressed. The impact of this can easily be felt today, as Thultide states, "Why does every single piece of cinema, music, art, and literature promote completely degenerate garbage? Why does every journalist rat seemingly have ties to Antifa? Why is every college professor a disgusting, unwashed Marxist hippie? Because since the end of the Second World War, every social institution in the West has been slowly colonized and subverted by communist agents. This includes card-carrying members of the Communist Party, KGB, NKVD, etc. agents, communists, true believers, and hapless fools who simply absorb the ideology via osmosis." None of this would have been possible without the intervention of international finance, which, once again, is the central tool of subversion as it has been, even since before the age of nationalism. The Bolsheviks were funded by the same City of London and Wall Street bankers who established the Federal Reserve, IMF, and World Bank. This included Kuhn, Loeb & Co., the Federal Reserve Gang, and their German brother, Max Warburg, who funded Kalergi's European Union, aside Ellen Rothschild and Churchill's close friend, Bernard Baruch, as well as British financiers such as George Buchanan, a British knight and ambassador to Russia, who failed to evacuate the Tsar from Bolshevik Russia, resulting in the murder of the Tsar and his family, and Alfred Milner, a Balfour Declaration signatory and Rothschild employee, who co-founded to the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable's secret society. A Swedish bank named Nya Banken contributed a large quantity of capital to the Bolshevik movement, eventually becoming the Soviet State Bank. The Young Turks' wealthy financial advisor, Israel Gelfand Parvis, also likely contributed funds. Furthermore, the Bolsheviks were assisted by, in their travels, by various allies and agents of these international financiers, such as Woodrow Wilson, whose presidential campaign was funded by the Federal Reserve Gang, who provided Trotsky with a fake passport to return to Russia during the First World War, and William Weizmann, an MI6 agent and employee of Kuhn, Loeb & Co., who saved Trotsky from being imprisoned by the MI5 while he was in Halifax. Cultural Marxism has become the de facto moral system of the global financial elite. We are reminded that Marx had genealogical connections to the Rothschild banking family and to wealthy, influential bankers. The USSR was made possible by global finance and the globalist system today. Though it has changed its outer form, it has not essentially changed hands. The post-bourgeois neo-capitalist elite, or neo-communist if you prefer, remain thoroughly in charge, exploiting the system of finance and consumerism to morally subvert our countries. World War II ended not with just a victory for the internationalist allies, but also with a decisive Marxist victory for the Comintern and the USSR. Widespread Soviet infiltration of Western institutions was facilitated by the KGB, other branches of Soviet intelligence, and the Comintern, culminating in the occupation of the US State Department by Red spies, and even leaks from the Manhattan Project, which may have led to the development of the Tsar Bomba. Also infiltrated was the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, the Treasury Department, and the White House itself. All this was revealed by US cryptanalysts during the Venona Project, wherein U.S. intelligence intercepted Soviet cables for the purposes of identifying whether Stalin wanted to ally with Germany during the middle of the war. The U.S. was rife with communist agents. The Silver Master Group, one of the spy networks, was numbered at about 85. Known members include Shlomo Adler of the Treasury Department, Lachlan Curry, who was a special representative in China, and Harry Dexter White, head of the International Monetary Fund. Of course he was. The infiltration of foreign policy institutions may have been instrumental to the success of Mao Zedong's regime in China. As detailed and blacklisted by history, one spy worked to deliver false reports about the state of rebel Chiang Kai-shek's forces to the State Department, reporting that they were disorganized and demoralized. This caused the United States to cut off funding and support, dooming the anti-communist forces to failure. The pipeline that the Soviets used to backdoor into the US was at first through the OSS's Wartime Production Board. It was absolutely filled with communists and sympathizers who had no issue getting through to the State Department. Another vector of infiltration was through the universities, which were already at the time full of Marxists, particularly through one, Professor Lattimore. Senator Joseph McCarthy, armed with information from FBI case files, was determined to bring this subversion to light so it could be squashed. However, he is faced with a concerted effort to slander him. In Congress, one representative undertook a form of theater to embarrass McCarthy, resorting to snide ridicule rather than argument. We could say that it was not an argument. Unfortunately for McCarthy, a critical file was mysteriously missing from the FBI archives, and the FBI had no idea where it was. This lack of access to important information weakened his case, which was much to the advantage of the Red spies. The official narrative on this in U.S. public schools is that McCarthy was a wacky conspiracy theorist, that he had a fake list, and that he was lying about the extent of communist infiltration. M. Stanton Evans revealed a contrary story. He showed that McCarthy's information was not fabricated at all, and that his list closely matched that of the FBI at the time. The subversion went beyond just the Rosenbergs or Alger Hiss. It was a mass-scale program of intelligence carried out by a web of Red sympathizers. And all of this had its origins even before the Cold War. The rootless International was not content to wait for its present enemy, in the form of the nationalist Germany, to be defeated.